Of the more invested and fulfilling aspects of viewing art or media, to comprehend the process of how it was made can not only enhance our appreciation of the work, but also connect us to the people that make it. On top of having the creators open up more about what they put out, there can also be hurdles like having to keep up appearances or withholding due to corporate permissions. Despite our modern-day advancements of recording and note-taking, this perhaps can become even harder to see where media can be a product of many people, and its iterations can be so long and arduous that it's too large for a person to commit the time and effort into seeing. However, when the stars align and we can look behind the curtain, there can be such intimate moments that may perhaps inspire us even more than the original art itself. Throughout his early career, Jordan Mechner forever impacted the gaming landscape with the critically acclaimed creations of Karateka and Prince of Persia. However, almost more interesting in my opinion, were the journals he wrote in the production of these games. Whereas these games are still incredibly fun to play and filled to the brim with charm, the Making of Karateka and the Making of Prince of Persia can speak to us on more than just how these games were physically made. If we read it from the author's unfiltered source, we can look into the process of creativity, inspiration, and the human cycles that we all can find ourselves in when we reach our goals and find that it doesn't end there. So join me, if you will, and see how the creation can be just as brilliant as the result. Although Jordan Mechner had made games prior in his spare time, Karateka would be his first completed and published game. Spanning from 1982 to 1985, the journal chronicles the conception, development, and reception of the classic Apple II title. The story starts with a young Jordan as he starts school at Yale, and almost completely flunks it as he works on a game he wouldn't finish. It's this beautiful introduction to see someone who we know will be a legendary game maker, but is also so lackadaisical.
Sent off the letter to Doug Carlston at Birdabun this afternoon. Worked on Deathbounds, it's coming along. By the way, I missed history and psych today. Not good. Slept till noon again and missed all my classes. Music, Philos, Soch. This is getting ridiculous. It snowed today. It was an awesome blizzard. They closed the university. No classes, no library, nothing. Naturally, I did no further research on the soak paper. I worked a bit on Bounce.
Even when he was not working on games, you can tell that despite his attitude towards school being positive, the 17-year-old is relatively distracted with other thoughts and fascinations at the time.
Can I write? Am I any good? Could I succeed? I could always do it on the side, say, while writing computer programs. Geez, it'd be so fun to write a short story. Just to try it. See how it turns out.
A common occurrence that happens in both books is Mechner's distractions and potential uncertainty of what he wants to do. Where something like a behind the scenes of a movie would show the highlights of entertaining or interesting points of production relating to the game, few look at the headspace of the creator before the light bulb goes off. The journal, however, speaks for itself in how Jordan can be his own worst enemy.
I hereby vow no more work on this project until Friday. Until my psych paper, history paper, psych tests, philosophy paper, and music are out of the way. I'm f***ed. I just spent half an hour trying to study for psych. The Bartlett effect? What the f*** is that? My only hope is to ignore everything in the book and the memos and just rely on common sense and my way through the rest. It counts for 40% of the term grade, and I haven't done a jot of reading. Saw Breston's Pickpocket today. Really good movie.
In some ways, these distractions also came as a blessing of inspiration. Over the span of the following months, Mechner would start taking karate, watch movies, and play new computer games after making connections with Broderbund. This would slowly transition him into considering a more cinematic and intense idea that would become Karateka. One of Jordan's biggest influences was Choplifter for the Apple II, and he wrote quite a bit about it in his journal. From a modern lens, it's a fairly simple game, But at the time, it was not only fast-paced, but also emotionally resonant. In a 2015 conference, Mechner spoke about how you would feel bad about flying away when rescuing hostages because they would wave their arms in helplessness. Although he didn't know it at the time, and perhaps subliminally, this would be a pivotal part of his philosophy, to feel a connection with the characters you play as, and attempt to rescue. The emotional shots of Princess Mariko waiting and then the tender embrace of the reunion leave a sense of motivation for the character to seek out their one true love. Alternatively, the warlord Akuma gradually sends out stronger fighters to face you, with commanding and cinematic points. It does a lot with so little, and you only need to look at the other games of the time to see how far ahead of the curve this cinephile-inspired development was. On the topic of emotional connections, I think it's safe to say that many university students could easily connect with Mechner.
Increased class cutting, decreased homework, going to sleep later and later, mess piling up on my desk, putting things off, D- on German midterm, 4 out of 10 on CS assignment. Meanwhile, I've been poring over Soft Talk and Writer's Market, daydreaming about having a best-selling game or novel, dreaming about success. Just do it! Work! No more of this minimize effort game. Try maximize effort for a change, okay? Okay?
I think it's the human passions of Mechner that get me the most. From his musings about being excited for Revenge of the Jedi, or talking about books that he's reading, you really do feel like Jordan is just a young guy, soaking in media and culture he had at the time while just happening to create an incredibly influential video game. That's not to say, however, it was happening in parallel to each other, though. The music and iconography were heavily inspired by Mechner seeing Seven Samurai. Jordan's love of old Disney films inspired him to rotoscope movement of his karate trainer for more lifelike movement. The journal juggles the angst of the creator too as it develops. Not only does Jordan manage school and social life, but his determination to work also sees highs and lows. Sometimes how during this multi-year process, it's something that he just wanted to finish and move on with other parts of his life. For me, it took me back to my days in school, working on games in my spare time and struggling to find drive or motivation to keep working, especially as the project sets in for the long haul. Creative processes, of course, take time, and Mechner, more than most of us, are unaffected by fatigue or wanting to skip to the end. It's cathartic, and makes the struggle of releasing the game all the more understandable, even if not all the tech terms to the general reader are.
I got in an hour or two on Karateka this morning. I'm still not in working mode. It's not that I feel impelled to work on it, drawn to work on it. It's just that not working on it makes me feel guilty.
Of course, in this being a journal that's updated over time, it's all the more interesting to read from a point of incompletion and then pick up on the parts as they develop. Karateka was just made to be a one-on-one fighting game on a karate mat, but slowly turned into a cinematic adventure of saving a princess from a demon-like warlord. Knowing the result of the completed state, it's fascinating to pinpoint where certain prominent aspects make their way into the game.
In a brainstorming session with Dad, I got many good ideas. The most important is 1. Add footstep sounds for you and the guards, and 2. Keep cross-cutting between the two of you. If you stop running, it cuts back to the guard running toward you. Tension.
Karateka would release in late 1984 and become a defining piece of the early PC gaming market. Tactful and personal, filled with against-the-odds moments and tense build-ups. You can beat the game in under 20 minutes, but any death sends you back to the beginning, so as the difficulty ramps up, so does the sweat on your palms. Of course as well, the animations are still unlike anything for computers at that time. The main hurdle accomplished was how much information and graphics could be put on a 45 kilobyte floppy disk, about the same file space as a short email today. Clever tricks like having bad guys just have different heads than the player were just one of many small loopholes that Mechner would create to pull it off. After a few months of marketing and word of mouth, Karateka would be a hit. But with this would come Mechner's jump into a place he hadn't faced yet. He had now proven himself as a programmer with Karateka, climbing up the ranks on Billboard. His future seemed secure, but the hardest question was, what would that future be? When your projects take up such a big part of your life, what do you do when they're done?
My scenarios for the post-commencement future all have one thing in common. They're gutless, no major changes. Try my hand at screenwriting, but without abandoning game making. Move to California, but only for a little while. Live at home, but not indefinitely. Always the safe road, the non-choice. I don't get these impulses very often, so I better make the most of this one. Do something now. If I'm always afraid of doing the wrong thing, making a second best move, I'll never get anywhere.
The Making of Prince of Persia takes off right where the Making of Karateka ends. With college quickly ending, 20-year-old Jordan makes the decision to get back into games despite the desire to write screenplays. It's funnily ironic that at the time he was drawn to screenplays because him and his peers saw computer games as a dying market. Even while being hit by inspiration to the setting of Prince of Persia, however, Jordan still had reservations.
Last night I was kept awake by anxiety about the new game. All the detail I'm gonna have to put in, it just seems so daunting. How did I do it for Karateka? I can't remember. I'm not sure I can do it again. The doubt is still there in the back of my mind. It talks to me from time to time. Jordan, it says, what are you doing? You're taking a step backward. You want to be a filmmaker. It's time to move on. You brought the Apple computer game Thread of Your Life to its climax a year ago. You caught the industry just before it started to die. Before you started to lose interest in games yourself. Now you want to do just one more game? Why? Timidity. Fear of breaking loose. You'll waste a year, man. If you're going to try for Hollywood, now is the time. Shut up, I say, and doubt grumbles and crawls for a moment back into its hole.
Pushing away the fears, Mechner began doing what he did best. Inspired by warm reception of his rotoscoping and lack of animation skills, he got a video camera and started recording his brother David in a parking lot. After developing the film, he would go through the process of digitizing the footage, which only took black and white contrast, which Mechner would have to draw over the footage by hand with a marker. But the results, of course, speak for themselves. The prince was lifelike, much more human than anything we would see in the early days of gaming. Where other titles focused on quick, responsive, or exaggerated motions, Prince of Persia would have anticipation and wind-up based on movement. Inspired yet again by film, Mechner would take inspiration from the tension found in the first 10 minutes of Indiana Jones. All this development came over the course of a year, and while he was breaking new ground yet again for computer game animation, Jordan was also breaking new ground for his personal life. The first time I read The Making of Prince of Persia was when I was in my 3rd year of high school. It was inspiring to read that mostly one person could change games and create new experiences if they set their mind to it, and it encouraged me to pursue studies in games and how they could push storytelling forward. My second read of it was equally impactful when I was 22 and seeing a 22-year-old Jordan go through the same transition of life changes as he moved to California.
Now that the day's over and it's clear that I have nothing to be scared of, I'm not scared anymore. I'm terrified. I'm scared shitless. I have to rent a car. I have to drive it on these insane 12-lane racetracks they call freeways. I have to find an apartment and rent it. I have to move in. I have to buy a car. I have to buy insurance. I've never done any of this stuff before. And now I have to do it all at once. And on top of this, or rather the bottom of it, I have to make a computer game. It's gonna be fun.
Coming-of-age stories about adulting are seldom something that we see prominently featured in media, Whereas many films about finding one's identity and calling are usually set in high school or college, fewer dwell on the hurdles of being thrust out into the autonomy and self-responsibility of adulthood. Jordan would have friends to support him, such as the late Tommy Pierce and Vida Cook, but treading the unknown waters of secondary education is a different experience to each individual. The beginning of the Making of Prince of Persia is almost as much about a psych grad moving across the country to pursue a job not in his field, as it is about making a game about Arabian Nights. No sooner was Mechner hitting the ground running on Prince, however, than his other passion came calling. In his spare time, Jordan had been writing screenplays, and after some time, one of his screenplays looked like it could be viable. Although well received by a group of interested parties and rewritten by Jordan to improve it, the screenplay was never picked up, but it got the young creator's foot in the door of Hollywood, while also keeping him away from games.
On impulse, more to escape cabin fever than anything else, I drove into Broderbund and actually put in a full day of work, oiling gears that have rusted in place inside my head. I was startled to realize that the most recent code printouts in my folder are dated March 26, 1987. In essence, I stopped working on the game the day I got the call from Virginia Geritlian. 8 months ago. What the hell have I been doing for 8 months?
I think, however, the pull between the silver screen and a 12-inch monitor is what led Jordan to make Prince of Persia. Instead of making a game like any other platformer at the time, his heart was still deeply in the movies, even to have the working title of Prince be The Thief of Baghdad, inspired by the 1924 and 1940 classics of the same name. Creative works, after all, are seldom what they're first expected as. Even in The Thief of Baghdad's case, it was a movie rife with changes and setbacks. It started out as a musical, it went through 6 directors, and filming had to move to America because a gosh darn World War was happening. Even on a small level, during reshoots, Abu's actor had gotten taller, much like how Mechner noted the same problem with his brother David when doing reshoots. When Jordan would return, not only was he recharged to make games, but design choices of cinematic inspiration would soon follow. On an afternoon of working on the game, Jordan's friend and coworker Tommy insisted on him adding other characters to the game to make it more fun. Caving to the idea, Jordan added an inverted color version of the prince, and thus Shadow Man was born. Throughout the game, your shadowy foil foils your plans in a multitude of ways. In one instance, he steals a powerful upgrade, and just as you find your way out of the dungeons and see the night sky, he's there to send you back down. Dark versions of yourself are nothing new in video games, but in your confrontation with him, violence isn't the answer. For every blow you take of him, he'll return it back to you. The solution is to accept that he is a part of you and put away the sword. In doing this, your strength is restored and gives you the power to defeat the evil vizier. While the initial idea by his coworkers was to obtain an amulet to defeat the shadow, the choice for Mechner was not only clever, but also personal, whether he knew it or not. The inclusion of more than one character would open the floodgates for combat to be added. Not only would this bolster Mechner and Broderbund's team's optimism for the game, but Jordan's classic film knowledge would come in handy in figuring out combat animations.
Doug, Broderbund's president, told Tommy my game is going to be a smash hit. Spent much of today on hands and knees poring with Eric over 36 snapshots spread out on the office floor, trying to deconstruct Basil Rathbone and Errol Flynn's climactic duel in Robin Hood. We really busted our brains. As a result, my conception now is totally different from what it was yesterday, or Sunday. It'll all be worth it. This is going to be the greatest game of all time.
Mechner would go throughout the year working on Prince with new animations, developing levels, and meeting with other Broderbund members for ideas like box design and porting to other computers. Aspects of Karateka would return, such as the satisfying impact on a hit effects. But most important would be the familial connections. Jordan's father, Francis, a psychologist and classical pianist, had previously assisted in giving his son ideas, participating in reference footage, and adding music to Karateka. On a time-sensitive trip back to New York State, the father and son would work together to create the music for Prince of Persia. The result would be incredibly memorable themes, and for the Apple II's capability, it would be really impressive. This one passage, however, struck me with an impactful point of how creating art can be an escape, a blessing, and a curse all at once.
I've never seen Dad so tired and fragile. It's terrible how this last year of KVC Atlantic has aged him. Sometimes when he gets excited about a new musical idea, his old energy shines out briefly. But in repose, the exhaustion shows in his face and in the way he sits. This weekend of music making has been a good change of pace for him, but he's worried about my imminent departure. I already changed my ticket to give us another day. I know he's afraid of not finishing in time, of letting me down. So, in a way, I've added to his burdens. And me, maniacal auteur taking precedence over his dutiful son, I'm pushing him as hard as he can take, hoping that my tireless cheerfulness will somehow cheer him up. They're taking out a second mortgage on the house.
Alongside our creative endeavors, we seldom work in a vacuum. We need help from others, and family and friends are there to support us. Doing our passions can distract us and make us happy, but can also be mentally or physically taxing despite our desire to do it. It's something that can equally add stress in hoping to live up to expectations or just being burdened or distracted with other aspects of life. Those who support us can be living equally complex lives and have even more difficult challenges. Mechner would continue to work long hours, crunching himself until the project was finished, hoping that the work put in would justify this strenuous 4-year production. Prince of Persia launched in October of 1989 to disappointing sales. Despite the overwhelming critical reception, a lack of marketing push from Broderbund, and its initial availability on a now ancient Apple II, meant that Prince of Persia had been released in a shadow rather than a spotlight. Sales would finally pick up as ports were made for other computers, consoles, and handhelds, but it left Mechner without much relief for almost a year after its release.
Another lackluster month for Apple Pop sales. 600 odd units. In the same month, Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego sold 15,000 units. God, I want this game to be a hit so badly. It's the best game I know how to make. As far as I can see, I've done everything right. If it doesn't become a hit, I don't want to be in this business anymore. At least I've applied to NYU, but if Pop isn't a hit, how am I going to pay for it?
When we make something, it's not a wrong thing to want it to succeed. Whether that be from a peer's praise, monetary success, or even personal satisfaction, it's crushing to see when all the work and effort goes in, and it's not worth the sacrifices. In Jordan's story, it takes a while, but it's interesting to see that in the story of this cult classic, the game's creator goes through both an arc of failure and success. As his metaphorical and literal fortunes changed, Mechner continued to create and learn throughout 1990. The young artist would write another screenplay, go to the film school at NYU, and research and develop ideas for Prince of Persia's sequel. Prince of Persia 2: The Shadow and the Flame would be a more cinematic game with more of what made the original great. With its upgrade from the limitations of the Apple II, The Shadow and the Flame would have more inspiration to lean into the 1001 Tales of Scheherazade. Mechner would take a directional role, but unlike Prince 1's development, he would be spending less time at Broderbund's offices during production.
Yesterday was my last day at Broderbund. I said goodbye to everyone. It's actually not such a bad thing, taking off for months at a time. They spend so much time saying, if only Jordan were here. They're starting to idolize me in my absence.
Jordan would continue taking school and traveling in New York, France, and Spain. Now backed with the royalties of other developers remaking and porting his game, he had freedom to do what he wanted without worry of cost. Although his journal entries would hint at something not feeling right, in his 2015 talk, Facing Your Dark Side in Video Games and Life, Mechner confessed that he didn't have as much fun living this carefree life of travel as he thought he would. Now that he didn't have to focus on Prince of Persia finding success, he was now trying to live outside of just working, and haunted by repressed emotions he had pushed down during development. A written aspect of guilt, anxiousness, and isolation would ride up on him, even while he was enjoying himself from the newfound success of Prince of Persia.
I called Tomi. I needed to talk to somebody who loved me. She said Florence told her I'm learning French like there's no tomorrow, and Sally told her I'm living a life right out of Henry James. You have a dream life, she said. You're traveling, you have friends. What exactly is the problem? I've chosen a life so different from everyone else's that it cuts me off from them. Practically everyone treats me like a guest celebrity. Of course, it's my own fault. I feel so damn alone sometimes. I feel like I could just float away into the stratosphere, and everybody would stand there looking up at me, and no one would haul me back down to earth. No ropes.
The Jordan of early Karateka and the Mechner of now were now different sides of a coin. Where he had chastised the attitude of not working on his creations and fantasized about being renowned, he was now seeing less satisfaction in these points of rest and fame. In creating, we push ourselves to make the best of what our abilities can handle, but the danger of that is that we tie our self-worth, meaning, or identity to those creations. When work, school, or any facet of life becomes the end-all be-all, an absence or total attachment to it can reflect our own emotional cycles. Being away from his support and workmates, Jordan had to come to terms in some ways with his identity and aspirations outside of creativity. I feel like had a better life balance been established, this melancholic withdrawal would not be so daunting. The solution is to put down the sword. Jordan would not be able to fully put into words why he had these feelings until much later, but at least for now, he was starting to unpack the questions of why he had these emotions. It was a journey just like how any of us don't just arrive at the station of being better. This period of rest was important for the creator, as he would recharge from the crunching on Prince and start becoming inspired by his next great endeavor.
I was taking the night train to Berlin. And thus begins the noir eve of World War I adventure Tomi and I are cooking up. Now, finally, I'm excited.
Jordan Mechner would finish up his travels primarily after filming a documentary in Cuba, and return to Broderbund to finish up the rest of Prince 2 with the team. The book concludes at the beginning of 1993, similar to how the Making of Karateka ended. The game was a couple months from being completed and ends with life just continuing on. It's not a triumphant conclusion, and we don't even see the result of Prince 2's success. The ideas of what would become The Last Express would be weaving their way into the next great endeavor, but that would be another journal for another time. Jordan Mechner would continue to work with Karateka and Prince of Persia properties long after his journals would end. He would consult on Prince 3D, join the Ubisoft Montreal team for the Sands of Time, write the screen story for the Disney movie, and help co-author the graphic novels for the tie-in. In 2012, he would even step in to help direct a remake of Karateka. But even if those properties are what he's most well known for, it wouldn't be an accurate picture of him. Jordan Mechner would continue to be creative in endeavors that strummed on other life passions, of films, sketch journals, and books. Maybe the legacy of these projects can impact how we go about our work and relationships, and inspire future projects, but life doesn't stop when that project ends. It doesn't even end when the magnum opus concludes. Jordan Mechner's recent graphic novel is a story about him, his father Francis, and his family, with an English translation coming out in March. Soon after this video's release will be the launch of the playable documentary The Making of Karateka. While I'm excited for both of these, I think nothing tells the story better and more complete than the messy, biased, and beautiful musings of the creator as they create, because at the end of every piece of art are the people who make it. This is just my interpretation of the story, and maybe I'll have a different opinion about it next time I read it, but for my money, the Journals of Jordan Mechner are some of my favorite relatable pieces of literature. Hey, thanks for watching my video! A big thanks goes out to my wife Mary for helping me with the audio for the journal entries and advice for the script. I hope this gives you interest to read the journals, and you can find the means of procurement on Jordan's website, which I'll link in the description. If you're interested in the Prince of Persia journal, a 30th anniversary hardcover was created, and if you have the ability, I highly recommend seeking it out. This version not only provides more artifacts throughout the books, but also annotations and illustrations made by Mechner in 2019 for additional context and commentary. When it released in North America, it only shipped to the States, so I had my American friends send it to me, and in exchange, I shipped him its equal cost in ketchup chips. That last part isn't important, but I thought it was funny enough to include. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and if you like what you saw, make sure to subscribe so you know when new uploads are released.